a very interesting panel on an incredibly important topic this morning, which has been written down here as the Can It Be Replicated? A look at Rwanda's development gains in context. And I guess context is a very interesting word. The panel we have this morning ranges from, on my far right, your far left, Paul Farmer, who really is a legend, already a legend, and probably going to be an even bigger legend in social entrepreneurship, and really dedicating a life to finding solutions for the poor in the area of healthcare and developing some extraordinary models from Haiti and in Rwanda. You know, it's always cited as a great example by Bill Clinton, and very close to the current head of the World Bank as well, which is very important, I think, in terms of where the World Bank puts its energies over the next few years, and it'll be interesting to hear your perspective on that question as well, Paul. Next to Paul is Mary Robinson, who is, although she always hates this title, an elder, a young elder.
In medicine, we say she appears younger than her stated age.
Exactly. And Mary is president of Ireland, has life in the UN, dedicated to work with human rights, and her own non-government organisation also with that focus, and now has a very important role, which is just beginning, which she'll hopefully tell us about, overseeing peace agreements and things in the Great Lakes region, including Rwanda. And Dale, next to Dale Dawson, is the founder and CEO of Bridge to Rwanda, which is, he'll tell us a bit about, but it's an NGO working with businesses, bringing foreign businesses into Rwanda, but is a businessman before that, with a long career in that side of the development equation. And then immediately to my right is the Health Minister, Dr. Agnes Binagwaho, who has not only been Health Minister for the past couple of years, but really has been involved in many of the good work being done in Rwanda over the last 10 years. So for me, this panel, it felt a bit like a poison chalice when I was asked to give it, to moderate it, because it's one of those areas where I write about philanthrocapitalism a lot, and these tremendous social entrepreneurs doing tremendous work. And normally I feel I can write positively about many of them without really a lot of cognitive dissonance going on. But with Rwanda, I see on the one hand this extraordinary development story where people like Paul are case studies in excellent social entrepreneurship. We have headline results that Paul Collier of this university says is one of the most remarkable hat tricks achieved by development in terms of rapid economic growth, declining poverty and reduced inequality. And yet I also have been a great admirer over the years of civil society organizations and campaigning organizations like Human Rights Watch. And Human Rights Watch has been one of the most vocal critics of President Kagame and his government in its human rights area, where claims are made about activities in Congo which have cost millions of lives. And trying to weigh up how we should feel and what we should want to replicate, and what we can learn from this situation as an international community, as social entrepreneurs, is I think one of the most important questions of our day, because there is in the development world a recurring cycle, it seems often, of finding leaders we can work with who then turn out to be leaders we wish we hadn't worked with, and yet the work has to be done. It's a humanitarian project that we're engaged in to try and make a better world, and sometimes that means operating in grey areas a lot of the time. So I'm really just fascinated by what our panelists' perspectives on some of these questions are, how narrow they want to talk about Rwanda, and how much they want to go broader. We will find out. One thing I would say, and I'm sure I don't need to say it here, with this being Skoll and us all being a sort of a band of fellow sisters and brothers all trying to engage in the same project, that I do hope this conversation will be a respectful conversation, because I know emotions do sometimes run very high on these topics. But I want to start with Paul Farmer, really. Just Paul, you've been there for many years now. I just want to tell you, how do you weigh up the work that you've been doing and how we should think about it in the context that we're now talking about it?
Well, I mean, first of all, I thank you for including me and for opening up the session. All the work that is done in medicine and public health is teamwork, right? So I don't have any particular opinion on my work except the work of a team, and that team is largely, again, you mentioned civil society. A group like Partners in Health is a non-governmental organization, just like Harvard University is a non-governmental organization. So with the team I will speak of is largely NGO team, and we have worked with the ministries, the ministry most relevant to our work, which is obviously health. And Agnes, Dr. Beniguaho is not the Minister of Health, as you noted, 10 years ago when we began, and I'd like to talk, I hope we get to talk more about her role over the years. But the way I would sum it up is very simple, that if you're interested in any kind of outcome, in any kind of evaluation of the effectiveness of delivery of medical services and public health services, then you would say, this is a miraculous story to go from the lowest, worst indices in the world only 19 years ago on every metric that matters in my line of work, basically, who lives, who dies. I can go through the jargon. To go from that to, over the last decade, seeing the steepest declines in infant mortality, child mortality, maternal mortality, and what are called case fatality rates among people living with HIV, tuberculosis, malaria, and to be able to turn toward cancer, non-communicable diseases, some of which are in the kind that we'd see here. To see that all happen in 10 years is the dream, is a dream come true for a doctor interested in public health. And I'm so grateful to have been included in this miraculous transformation.
And for you, what are the factors that made that sort of transformation possible?
Systems, a focus on systems building, a focus on equity, that is not turning your head away, your gaze away from the rural poor. 80% of Rwandans live in rural areas. Where we started in rural Rwanda 10 years ago was a completely disrupted area. 60% of the people in this area were held to have been refugees or displaced people. No hospital at all, no doctor, and then to build systems across the country in all of the districts in Rwanda, that's number one. And I mentioned equity focus. To do that, you have to have good leadership. At the district level, that's how Rwanda is divided up into districts, like a lot of countries, but also you have to have good national leadership. You have to have a plan, an idea, a set of ideas that are flexible enough to include new technologies like electronic medical records, new medications like the ones that have brought people back from the patients I see brought them back to from the brink of death. It has to be a flexible system but a plan. And if you add up those four things, which I'd love to see happen in all the places where I work, including my own country, which does not have a systemic approach to healthcare like that, I think you'd see remarkable returns. And you know, ranking those in order of their importance is very difficult to do. To say this is the number one thing, the number two thing, the number three thing, it's very difficult to understand and to study, but it's not impossible to understand, and that's one of the points we've tried to make. Don't say this is a black box that no one can understand, or that it's you know, related to X, Y, or Z one thing. It's not. It's a very complex set of changes that can be studied and should be, so that other countries in the world, again, including the affluent ones, can learn from these lessons.
Thank you. Minister, can you, I guess, take the government perspective on what Paul's been talking about and on some of the development challenges? I mean, just tell us a bit about the work that you've done over the years and how you have found international organisations, social entrepreneurs, etc., have helped you achieve the kind of changes that have been achieved.
The first thing Paul have said, it's a system approach. And this is what we need to understand. And the second, he says, is difficult to rank what come number one, number two, number three, but you can miss none of them. None. Meaning, the principle we base our actions, of course, is good leadership, tolerance zero for corruption. I don't say that we don't have corruption. We just have tolerance zero for corruption. And participatory process. I'm laughing because I wonder what is your definition of democracy? I prefer mine. Because in my country, I cannot bring a policy on the table of the Prime Minister without consulting each and everyone concerned. Those will be actor, beneficiary, or supervisor, or anything. So, in that context, it's the way we chose to govern and to run our country. And who wants to come and give us a hand are welcome. They can tell you. Even Mary can tell you because she chairs Gavi. And Gavi is one of our best allies in the way we have saved children with the vaccine. On top of participatory process, we have also the equity. Me, I have a map, and I know where the hospital and health center are, and I know where I will put the next partner who come. You want to do an hospital, it will be there because there is something missing there. So that means the coordination of those partners is key. And that's why most of the Western partners that want to help us doesn't like. If you look at certain countries, they always go where there is nice beach, good hair, no trouble. They do good. They are there to save some black children. It's okay. So they are all black and all across the country. But my job is to make them go where there is the biggest needs. And many of our partners doesn't like that. And I think part of the criticism we got come from there. But so
just tell me a bit, because the international aid community, development community, community of social entrepreneurs, I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, I guess, Rwanda had emerged as the sort of the star, the poster child of how you can really move things in development, working with a government that's really, as you say, low corruption, willing to think systematically, working very constructively with partners. But obviously we're now in a situation where a number of governments in Europe have, in the last year, withdrawn or suspended their support, financial support to Rwanda. The British government seems to be freezing it and unfreezing it and freezing it again, depending on the time of day. But I mean, basically, how is that international behaviour affecting your work? Is it making you, in any sense, as a government, rethink how your approach should take place?
Approach to what?
To development and to responding to the... Firstly, on the question of what impact is this international community behaviour having on the work that you're doing, that people like Paul are doing, and Dale?
Don't confuse this guy and your government.
Well...
No. It's two different things. They want to do good for doing good, and they mobilize the money to do that across the world. Your government have money for development and decide where to push and to put that money. The decision where the money is to go is not necessary to do the best good. When your government come and try and decide to help us, they want something in exchange. Nothing is free. And if they want some of the conditionality, we cannot give because it's against our own development.
But I mean, the British government has in general been very committed to a policy of giving money with very few strings attached to to governments in recent
So
years,
tell me
general
why-
support budget, and that's what they've been freezing lately. I mean, it has been striking that they haven't been freezing direct grants to organisations and projects on the ground. It has been the high-level grants and the fear that that money is going towards military uses that has been driving the policy. I'm just interested whether you are seeing, or as a government, any impact on your ability to pursue the development agenda that we're here to talk about.
So far, no. And also, I have to say, your government never proved that one single pound have gone to military. It's just a talk in your parliament, etc. But there is no proof.
They may be the British government, but I wouldn't necessarily
And
want to
also,
claim any responsibility for what they're doing.
I feel more comfortable sitting here near you.
Matthew, I know there are a lot of people
Yeah.
speak, but I would just say, as a public health doctor or a doctor, who's not familiar with either the British quarrels or what we're talking about, I would just say it's very important to remember that it takes a long time to build systems. I mean, Rwanda has sped up that process to 10 years, a delivery platform, let's call it, use more jargon, so that you can actually roll out the fruits of science and technology to people who need it. To disrupt that, I would say that would be very bad for the kind of work we're trying to do, and we've lived through that in other places.
Now, are you seeing,
No,
very briefly,
no,
any
not-
impact on your work as a
not-
result
no,
of the international?
Not to my knowledge, no. There's a chill, among donors. Most of our donors are private donors, but anything that would upset this colossal work to improve the lives of poor people, it better. Well, I'm just saying, it's very disruptive to not have years to do this delivery work. Takes a long time to build systems.
Dale, I want to turn to you. Just tell us a bit about the work that you've been doing and how it's worked positively, and also to what extent the current international change of mood and mind is affecting what you're doing.
I'm an American businessman with no experience in development whatsoever, and but the Rwandans, as you know, are very independent and very have their own vision of what they want to do, but they've always put a great value on friends and good friends, and they have invested a lot of time in building friends, especially expanding beyond the traditional development, donor, government community to specifically to leaders in business and academics and church. And so President Kagame started 10 years ago coming to the United States and had a small group of friends, and we introduced him to more friends, and we began to introduce what was happening. And this story is extraordinarily appealing to private enterprise and to private business people. You have a very inspiring leader who's building a very strong team, who's actually going about systematically building a country. And so for private sector people, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to partner up with someone who shares our values and our approach to building things. So about 5 years ago, the president, a number of these friends of Rwanda got together, and the president organized a advisory council, which is a very eclectic group of about 24 people from different countries, different backgrounds, different professions, and we meet with him a couple of times a year, and we get briefings on what Rwanda's vision is, what they're doing, and we figure out how we can slide in there. And the two opportunities that they present to us, they take out of the playbook of the Asian Tigers, which is foreign direct investment is a way to accelerate economic growth and GDP. So one of our assignments is help bring more foreign investors into this country to build businesses. Alongside of that is the idea that creating opportunities for the very best and brightest Rwandans to study abroad, to get a global perspective, to understand how to compete in the global market, and then bringing them back is an important piece of accelerating their development. So we have Bridge to Rwanda was created as a result of that by a group of friends to facilitate foreign direct investment and creating opportunities for students to
So how much has happened now in foreign investment, and where has been the main focus of it, and who've been the big players?
We have tended, none of the entities are specifically large, but they are privately held. The first big project we worked on, we helped build the largest microfinance bank because the government wanted to shift the idea of savings, to move from a cash economy to a savings economy. And if poor people don't have a place to save, they don't have it. So we created a bank. We use biometric identification for accounts. We've opened 165,000 bank accounts in Rwanda in the last 4 years, and the average account balance is $75. We have 40,000 loans, and the average is $350. This is a standalone, highly well-run bank that makes money and pays taxes. We, in the agribusiness, we brought in one of our partners has come in and has become, to bring some competition into the purchasing of coffee. Coffee is the biggest export. There were 2 big players, not much competition. A third one's come in. Coffee farmers are getting better prices, and we're exporting more fully washed coffee. Rice, we have an Australian partner that came in to bring competition into the rice business. He's actually set up a Rwandan brand of rice, has opened 20 stores. We have brought Tyson Foods in to help increase milk, egg, and meat production. And we've started a 10,000 hen commercial egg farm, and we're building the first feed mill in Rwanda so that we can kind of provide a link between the grain farmers and the livestock farmers. In the tourism is the fastest growing industry in Rwanda, split between tourist and business travelers. Marriott has come in, is going to open one of their first hotels. We're trying to develop the Akagera Game Park as a counterbalance to the gorillas to extend people's stay. And we've had Africa Parks out of South Africa and the Walton Family Foundation support the development of that park. And we started an accounting firm. Interestingly, when you bring foreign investors in, the most interesting concern they have is how do I open a bank account? How do I pay my taxes? How do I pay my employees? And we've opened up an accounting firm with American, Australian, and Rwanda accountants to do that for them. So, so those are the kinds of businesses. We pick things that are going to affect a lot of people's lives and where we can come in with capital and management technology that leverages lots of different people in the agriculture or tourism sector.
Now, as you talk to international business people, to what extent is there an awareness of some of these debates that we've been having this morning about the international context of Rwanda? How much does that affect their behaviour?
Sure.
What are you looking for from the government in terms of reassurance as you go in?
They're all aware of it. It's a very relational kind of situation. And when people come to Rwanda and you see what's happening on the ground, what we find is that most of the things that are in the media are written by people who've never been there or who have very little exposure to it. And so these relatively high-level business guys that are coming in, they all are concerned, they all have questions about it, but what they experience, what they see, what they do on the ground is so disconnected with what the media does that they just ignore it.
Mary, firstly, your new role with the Great Lakes, you just tell us a bit about what that is and what your plans are to put that into practice.
Well, very recently I was appointed the Special Envoy of the Secretary General to the Great Lakes and the Democratic Republic of Congo because 11 countries, including Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda, and 8 other countries signed a framework agreement on peace and security for the region on the 24th of February. And part of my role will be to encourage implementation of that. So I don't really want to talk about it at this stage in the sense that I'm reading myself in and will be going there for the end of this month. But there were 2 things that I thought were relevant at this stage in talking about Rwanda itself. And one is part of that context you were mentioning, in context. Because I remember, as President of Ireland, going to Rwanda in just a few months after the genocidal killing in 1994, and we are in the month of April. And I'll never forget the aftermath of that, the smell of blood, the sight of clothes and shoes, etc. And I was the first head of state to go there, in fact. And I was so affected by it that the following year, when the United Nations was marking its 50th anniversary, and I was invited to represent Ireland, I had that sense of, this is going to be an occasion of great rhetorical speeches, and people with very bad records would make very flowing speeches. So I went back to Rwanda in 1995 to bring the aftermath, the huge prison population, the difficulties, the number of women who are HIV, all of that to the table, which, at least I tried to do. But it's the third visit to Rwanda as President of Ireland that almost struck me most. And that was in March 1997, so less than 3 years after the genocidal killing. And I'm sure Agnes will remember, it was a Pan-African Women's Conference. Those women in Rwanda had put together a conference that involved women from throughout Africa. I think I was one of 2 non-African women there. And they were ministers, there was one vice president, academics, community women. And I think that's one of the keys to why Rwanda is so successful, acknowledging that of necessity in some way, but at least women became very much part of the development of Rwanda, and I think that was very significant. And the second point I just wanted to make, because I was able to see it in a particular way to support what Paul was saying about the delivery of medical services. As Agnes said, I was chair of the Gavi board, and one of the strong members of it was her predecessor, Richard Sezibera. And when I was stepping down in December 2010 from the Gavi board, we had our last meeting in Rwanda, I think it was in November 2010. And I remember going out into a rural area with Richard, and I think Agnes, you were there too, and just seeing the detail of the clinic and every detail of the medical services, the vaccinations, etc. And one of the things that really struck me was the push for family planning. And indeed, I wanted to ask Agnes maybe, because this is something that I think is a real problem in African countries. The very high population growth, the problem of getting contraceptive devices, being able to afford them, etc. And it'd be interesting to know in that context how Rwanda is coping. But I think it's very significant that Rwanda decided to develop its whole population and to have the girl child very much a key part, and have women at all levels of decision making. And that was a significant part of it.
I mean, I suppose one of the questions that comes to my mind, and particularly, Paul was the first to mention the sort of systemic approach to development, is, what model what systematic model of development should we be having? We've gone from this model where 25 years ago there was a lot of the kind of aid that Dambisa Moyo has ended up writing about that was, not very effective, often politically driven, a lot of money ending up where it shouldn't have ended up. And then we've moved towards a more private sector model now. But there seems to be a very lively debate going on that I haven't got my own thinking clear on yet, which is, to what extent do we feel that the best course of development is through building up civil society, through strengthening human rights and accountability of government and so forth, versus this kind of strong leadership, building strong institutions from the top down, creating effective health systems and so forth. And ideally they wouldn't be in tension, but in some cases, maybe Rwanda, they seem to be. But this is clearly an issue that Aung San Suu Kyi is getting into trouble in Myanmar about already. Do we focus on attracting foreign investment into the Chinese, getting the mining in and so forth, or even that, if that involves ignoring the property rights of people that were supporters that lived for many years in historic lands. I mean, to what extent, Mary, do you feel, as someone who's worked in human rights for so long, that we should be stressing human rights and accountability in civil society more as we evaluate who we want to champion as development models?
Yeah, I feel that both from the experience of serving as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, but also serving on the board and the Prize Committee of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, focusing on African countries and focusing on governance issues. And I think it really becomes more and more important to realize that governance matters, tackling corruption, but also having a vibrant civil society, having the spaces in the community. In fact, it's interesting that the EU has just commissioned a report about what should happen after the MDGs, and it stresses the importance of issues of voice, participation, etc. But then, you can have different kinds of participation. But I think for sustainability and for a really vibrant community, you do need to have the voices, diversity of voices that are enabled to have space in a country.
Minister, to what extent is that part of your vision as a government for Rwanda? Because certainly I'm aware of newspapers that have been opened and closed very quickly and so forth, and there seems to be a prickliness towards some of the voices that want to express themselves in Rwanda. Do you feel that building out civil society should be something you stress more in the years to come now as you push forward?
That has been my job during the last 10 years. To build a civil society that is capable, and even civil society, to build communities, because what we do as government or civil society is for the community. That they can contribute, participate, and direct what community health mean for them. And be the leader in that. We bring the technicity, they bring the guidance. This is my job. But what I want also to say, I want to correct a little bit Mary. In our tradition, women have always got the position. If you see the Mother King, she was fully leading the country, except she didn't have the right to go to war. Who's going to cry not to go to war? Huh? So that means what we live now in Rwanda, most of it is linked to our culture and our ground, our roots. So for the civil society and for the journal we close, did you got the translation of those journals that were closed? Did you analyze the content of the journal we close? I think closing a journal should not be what it is per se and stop there. It's what are we closing? I think in this country, you are not allowed to say anything. I cannot go in a journal and say anything I want against you. You will sue me. And when we do that in Rwanda...
That's a growth industry in the UK.
I know. I know. But
but it tends to be newspaper people that close their newspapers if they want to close them rather than the rest of us.
Yes, but just look what we close. It's not closing. It's what we close and what we do. But giving a voice to the population, giving a voice to the civil society, building a civil society, for me, they are my best ally because they know better than me what are their problems, and me, I'm just there to help to solve them. And if you see, if you should come to Rwanda and talk to them. I think this is where you see that there is so big disconnection between what people think and write about Rwanda and what we live. What Mary says about this health center, if you have a country with 430 across the country, one per sector to assure equity, the equity is based on administration. We have 500 and something sector, we need one health center by sector. And all health center has the same capacity, the same organization, the same way to provide drugs, the same quantity according per capita of the sector. And this is controlled by a committee of people in the community. If they don't have what they need, I'll be in trouble. So that means my bosses, my really bosses, of course it's the president, my really bosses is them, because if they know what they have the right to have. And if
this in a way, I'd love to get an answer to the family planning issue, because
family planning, what we reach there, we have done a lot of campaign, and we come from 10% uptake to 55 now, in less than 10 years. I think it's also the highest. So that means families has broken the stigma of having few children. And this go also with peace and security. Because if I am sure that my kids will remain alive, that means I trust the health sector that my child will survive. If for disease, when diseases are concerned, but also when conflicts are concerned. I remember when I came back in Rwanda, because I have only two children and 2 girls. The family want me to have more children, and the thing, the child will be killed by the others, the child will get HIV, the child will go, etc. I will remain alone. But now that we have universal access to HIV treatment, 90% of our kids are vaccinated against 11 vaccines. I think is the best rate ever. And the rate of death of children have dropped by 50% for under 5. People trust that government. People trust that health system that we have created. So they are ready to have less children. We have created universal access to a community health insurance. So it's all this that is part of the family planning. It's not only, my role is to avail the everywhere. And now, Mary, the family planning are going to be available in each village. That means each 100 or 200 houses, there are 2 people there that can inject, give the tablet, distribute the condoms, and give the advice. But the first uptake of this have to be in a health center to be sure that the checkup is done. So family planning is universally available almost at home.
Now, Mary,
The reason I ask that is I think that's one of the big issues in African countries at the moment, is the population increasing beyond the sustainable development of countries. So if we're talking about replication,
right.
the role of family planning is very, very key.
And what do you think works in terms of policy that you've seen in Africa to actually get family planning to be taken up?
Well, I mean, I was in Malawi in January, and I identified with the population of Malawi in the 1960s because it was the same as the Republic of Ireland, about 3 million. Malawi now is just over 15 million, and the predictions of the World Bank and the UNDP are that it will be 50 million by 2050 and 120 million by the end of the century. So how do you have food security?
Catholicism, I guess.
Well, the family size is 5.7,
right.
but there is a 42% uptake of contraceptives,
right.
but it's after women have had 5 or 6 children. And that's partly the security, that the children will live, because there's very high...
Yes, but for this you have to bring, this is for me the expression of a trust in life.
Yeah.
A trust in governance, a trust in the people that have your life and your security, etc., in their hands. And if you don't have that, don't try to promote family planning before 5 kids.
And Mary, I just want to ask one more question in terms of, someone who's been in politics and international politics and been in the UN system for much of your career. I mean, how should we weigh, the domestic success of a political leader in the developing world, if it turned out, for example, and obviously there's some debate about this. But I mean, if some of the claims that Human Rights Watch are making about President Kagame's influence in the broader region, if there proves to be substance to that, I mean, should we weigh, are we basically totting up points in favour because he's doing a lot of good stuff at home versus points against because he's maybe not doing such great stuff outside in the broader area? I mean, and when thinking about issues like sanctions or freezing aid or whatever, I mean, how should we be making those calculations as an international community?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, the countries of the region have signed up to a framework, and that framework commits them. And my role will be very focused on ensuring that that commitment is honoured and that there is both top-down and bottom-up accountability. And so I'm not going to comment on any single country within that framework. That framework will apply to all of the countries.
But in your experience of leaders, I mean, I'm thinking of the international community at times. Melesh in Ethiopia has been a darling of the international community, and at other times not before his death. And then there was in Uganda, the leadership there was briefly. I couldn't avoid walking around the UN without seeing adverts for conferences celebrating the Ugandan model, and then that went out of fashion. I mean, what can we learn as an international community from some of those past experiences when thinking about today and tomorrow?
Well, it's a rather general question in a way. I mean,
Well, the specific didn't seem to be working, so I was.
I think I'll pass on the general as well.
Can I make a
So,
specific question?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, because the specifics are really important. And when we talk about building, so you were using a general rights framework. You know, but there are civil, political, there are all kinds of rights. And I think what gets left out often in these discussions is, isn't there a right to development? Isn't there a right to health care? Isn't there a right to freedom from poverty, of not dying some absolutely ridiculous death because you're poor? And to answer that affirmatively, as I know people here do, you actually need delivery systems. And I'm sorry it's such a pedestrian term, but you need systems that can deliver with equity. So I wasn't just talking about systems. I was talking about systems with equity. That means gender equity. That means going to the poor and the rural poor particularly. And whether I would hope that some of the debates that we hear a lot are grounded in the specificity of, okay, what has been the record of delivery? And family planning is a great example. It's a technical example because community-based delivery of care, of this service, if you interview Rwandan women, the majority of them want to limit their fertility. So the confused debate is, wait, there's a cultural bias against family planning. There may be in Ireland, there may be in Argentina, there may be in lots of places, but there's a difference between uptake of family planning and security, ability to believe your children will live into the future in those places, despite their supposed similar Catholic religious background. So again, that can't be the reason. And the other, other example that we might not have time, Matthew, to understand, but what's happened with AIDS, and Agnes was the National AIDS Program Director. What happened there is really important because it pushed forward civil society, but who? People living with HIV, poor people in majority, and said, what do you think should happen to you? And in my experience in Latin America, this is the last point I'll make, is civil society is often code for non-poor people. That's the way the word gets used in Latin America. It means people like me and you, and human rights groups that can
But this does pose a very interesting question, because a lot of the work that has led to a lot of the focus on civil society has come out of a recognition that actually you do need to build up maybe the middle classes, and a lot of development policy has promoted a culture of dependency because it hasn't addressed that building up of the middle classes and creating space where entrepreneurship needs a context of freedom to really deliver the kind of growth that it's doing. So I see that I see your point, but how far do you take
freedom
that?
from want is a very important thing. All right, that's what I'm saying. Freedom from starving, freedom from dying of malaria, freedom from dying of, untreated after you break your leg in a fall. And I'm not counterposing that to the desire to build a middle class or entrepreneurship. I've already signed up for being part of the middle class and believing in entrepreneurship. I think the rights of poor people to the fruits of modernity, from family planning on to prevention of some new threat because we have a new vaccine, for example, HPV for cervical cancer. Those are really important parts of the report card. And every time we say that, we can't be told, boy, you're just totting up, as they say in England. And that happens a lot. You're saying you're totting up these victories and to counter other defeats. I'm saying, well, it is our job to figure out, as doctors and public health people, how to get these.
Okay, well, let me just ask you one follow-up question. I'm going to ask the Secretary and then bring the Minister in. But
can I add on that? Because who matters for me? It's not you. It's the poor guy that doesn't do $1 a day. So you want to have a freedom of speech. I want to feed the guy. I want to find a job for the guy. I want to educate the children. I want. And you just want to talk. So that's the difference between you and me. The second thing I would like to ask. But you talk to help me to make it. That's the difference. The second thing I would like to add, you talk about Ethiopia be the darling, Ethiopia be down. Uganda be the darling. Have you ever think that it's not Uganda who changed, but the UN? Could you ask the question in a reverse way? Where do they change their mind? For us, the country didn't change a lot.
I mean, if I'm being, my hypothesis, and it's not well tested, would be that there is a desperate desire in the UN community and in the international development community to find examples of success. And so there is a sort of a running, anything that shows the merest hint of promise, because the record is so bad in general. I mean, gets championed and put in conferences and so forth, and then the question is, people then look in more detail, and then we start to run into these questions of how do we engage with a leadership model that is often quite different to what we would have hoped for, given our Western traditions of democracy. But I mean, I'm interested. I mean, I'll come back to you, but Paul and then Dale. I mean, Paul, as a social entrepreneur, I mean, how, and obviously a very ethical person. I mean, how do you make peace with yourself about broader issues relative to the issues that you're seeing, where you're obviously seeing a positive, very positive trend? And how far do you feel? What point would you feel I have to take into account the broader context before I think we should definitely engaging?
I think we should definitely all take in broader context. I mean, how does it feel to be an American citizen working in Haiti, in Nicaragua, and El Salvador? How does it feel, for example, these are really important questions, and I'm very grateful that I have complete freedom of speech to write, long, boring books about them that only my mother will read.
Oh, what is
and so, I mean, I'm just saying context to me is all important. And that's still not the same question as how do we save lives of vulnerable, vulnerable people who, frankly, are, have been left out of progress. And I'm just, I think context is really important, and claims of causality are really important. And that happens to be my obsession, by the way, as an academic. I'm a volunteer in the work I do in Rwanda and Haiti, and have a paying job at a small community-based college in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But so that's what I'm interested in. Claims of
so
causality.
when you read a document from Human Rights Watch that sort of says maybe 5 million deaths can be laid at the
yeah, I want to know what are the methodologies, who did the research, who did all the things that one is, but same in, if Archbishop Romero, shortly before he gets shot during Mass, says, I want the United States government to stop funding military aid to El Salvador. That's because it's killing people in our country. It's a claim of causality. And you want to know, well, was the Archbishop telling the truth, or was he not? When the French say, the French government...
Does it feel to you like the fact that America has now suspended military aid to Rwanda, that is actually a lesson learned from the experience?
Well, I wasn't aware of that. I'm not interested in military aid.
Right.
I'm interested in medical
Well, you
assistance.
brought it up in the context
I'm
of
saying,
El Salvador.
I'm just saying I don't know the details, and learning the context is really important. And I think it would be good. I myself am not a fan of any military aid. I mean, look what happens when we sell landmines, and that's been the subject of discussion here. So I'll just say I'm not a big fan of military aid in general. And it
Well,
does
you probably get a round of applause for that.
No, I'm not looking for...
Yeah, no, but indeed, I mean, but to Dale, can I just ask the same question to you? I mean, how do you weigh up the practical, positive stuff that you're engaged in day to day with this broader contextual thing, and then we'll open up and bring in the audience.
Well, I think you have to, you can't ignore the accusations or the threats or the questions like that. But in every business I've ever been in, people have different opinions about things, and you weigh that based on the facts, you weigh that based on the credibility, you weigh that a great deal upon the character and the people that you know, and you have to decide who's lying and who's not. And I'm still working in Rwanda.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask people in the audience to ask questions. I say, just to emphasize, I think we need to make sure we keep this conversation in a nice, even tone, but these are very deep issues. Who'd like to go first? And please say who you are. The mic is going to come to you.
Hi, I'm Corey Shepard-Stern. I'm a filmmaker. And I'm here with Skoll, Sundance Stories of Change. My question is actually in the title of the discussion today is, can it be replicated? And so can we just have a brief discussion about that? Can these amazing gains that we've seen in Rwanda, and I have been in Rwanda, and I've lived in Liberia, I've lived in Nigeria, I've lived in Ghana, and being in Rwanda, I was shocked. It was like another planet. I mean, I was in a, I actually saw the minister, she does a Mondays with the Minister Twitter session where her, customer service for the healthcare, sector, and there was a stock out of sputum cups for TB, and someone texted, I couldn't get my TB test, and then within like 24 hours, there was this clinic where I was, where they were like restocking the TB cups, and there had been a memo. It was remarkable. Let me just say it was incredible. So what I'm really interested in is the question at hand: is the replication, and are there plans for mentoring or kind of some South-South collaboration? That's what I'd like to know about.
Paul, do you want to, and then the minister?
Yeah, I mean, it's what we're hoping. I mean, some of us are hoping. I've been working on a Haiti-Rwanda exchange, with the humble but earnest idea that NGOs, because there are a lot of them in Haiti, and there's a lot of goodwill in the NGOs. In fact, I've not encountered anything but goodwill, but we're not adding up to the sum of greater than the sum of our parts in that model, with a lot of uncoordinated goodwill in Haiti. So one of the things we're trying to do is have exchange between Haiti and Rwanda on the technical level and also on the district level.
And the big contrast between Haiti and Rwanda is, I mean, there's basically no effective functioning government in Haiti, and there is obviously in certain ways a very functional government in
Yeah, I mean,
Rwanda.
if I could, I would put it a little bit differently, but what I would say is that the public sector, the government, has been so eviscerated in Haiti that it's actually very difficult to move resources through that public sector to do things that we all would like to see happen. And again, a good public health and public education system. So understandably, and if you're looking at this from the point of view of an NGO, it's harder to work with the government, the public sector. And then, the earthquake came along. I mean, there were two people coordinating NGOs in what's called the Ministry of Plan, and they were both killed in the earthquake. And some people feel like up to 20% of the public servants in Haiti were killed in the earthquake. 27 out of 28 public buildings, that's not a lot of public buildings, were destroyed. So I wouldn't say it's not a functioning government. I think that would be uncharitable and inaccurate. But it doesn't have a deep bench, and just one other thing is less than 1% of the humanitarian relief aid to Haiti after the earthquake went to the Haitian government. So if that were changed just from 1 to 10, when you look at UN funding around food security and everything, it's not local production, etc. So there are a lot of technical things that I don't know that much about them, and as a physician, but I'm learning about them.
And Minister, are you getting a lot of requests from other governments for advice, and what are the main messages you're giving people?
We give them the message from the bottom to the top, and top to bottom, how we have made it. And
but what would the 2 or 3 points be that you would most emphasize? 2 or 3 points.
One of our biggest loss in energy is to try to convince the world that we are doing the right thing. This is divert by doing. So that means what we say, just go with your country, how you feel it. Consult your population and do that together. That's what we do. And if others are coming and interfere, and you just spend time to listen to them, you will be spoiled and lose focus. And also, never go, emergency, it's okay. What is done in this country, I've never been there. But I understand that if you don't build a strong public sector, the poor will always be the last served. And we need to be very, very careful. One of my biggest rules with the HIV money was to control the civil society, because they first serve themselves and after they serve the community. It's not all of them. This guy is not among them. And many in this room are not like that. But many so-called civil society was serving themselves with that money. And after that, give what remained to the population. And all this we have told them. And going through equity, because we have a partner who just come, I want to go in that district and make that district a 5-star district. What about the rest of the country? So that means express that what all opportunity have to be equally shared. And we got more than 50 visits the last 2 years. It's time consuming, but it's wise, because we need the world to go in that new vision. And what I like you say, evidence of success are there. Just tell me how, in a non-democratic way, I can vaccinate 90% of the kids without making the parents screaming. Mm-hmm. Okay. You see, so that means, that's why I say the definition of democracy, what is it? Giving an universal coverage for health, giving a hospital in an equitable manner, have the people together. That's the opportunity, what we do with that. So that's what we say. And my Twitter session, to be sure that we have telephone coverage across the country, anyone can reach me at that time. And it's very interesting. And this is direct communication with the population. Huh? And it teaches me a lot on what I can improve. So it's all this that we are talking about. It's a way to govern with the population. And I don't know where I can...
Mary, did you want to come in on
Yeah,
this
I just
point?
wanted to give a specific example. I was involved in an organisation called Realising Rights before returning to Ireland, and now having a foundation on climate justice. And for 8 years, we were working on health issues in a number of African countries. And we had a program in 4 African countries: Mali, Senegal, Sierra Leone, and Ethiopia. And actually, Rwanda was extraordinarily supportive. And Richard Sezibera conducted kind of seminars and talked about, particularly about the health insurance coverage in Rwanda and how to do that in a poor country and cover the population. That was one of the issues, and a number of other issues. So, if I can put it this way, Rwanda within Rwanda is remarkable in its development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Just add $1 worth of opinion on this issue of Rwanda.
Could we keep it to a question, because I want to keep it...
Well, just a very brief comment on the issue of civil society, as both discussed, raised by Mary and Paul. You see, when you talk of... First of all, if you look at the Western world, is that about 95% of people are actually not poor. They are rich. If you go to the third world, if you come to our countries in Africa, about 80% of people are actually poor. So when you talk of civil society, how does that civil society represent the voice of the ordinary person in the village? Those people actually belong to something you'd call traditional society, not civil society. And therefore, the platforms that are very effective in promoting democratic participation in the West, which is civil society, don't apply in our poor countries because people are not members of civil society. But most important about this, because some of these issues...
Can you turn this in? I mean, is the question basically how
yes,
much...
but let me just explain...
Well, no, we've got time pressure and lots of other people who want to come in.
Yes, just the last one. The second thing is that when you talk about representation through civil society, most civil society in Africa are NGOs. The people who are beneficiaries of the work of NGOs are not members of the NGO. They receive charity, not rights from the NGO. They don't elect the NGO leaders. They don't finance them. So there is no method through which ordinary people can hold NGOs accountable. So NGOs are not instruments of democratic participation in Africa.
So the question would be...
So the lesson from Rwanda, and what
No,
you
the
can
question...
replicate...
Okay, I think we have a question about whether West... where is the... what is the model for civil society in these kind of... transitional, and how do we hold NGOs accountable? But let's move to the lady in the middle here. If you'd send the mic over there.
But it's a great question.
Yeah, why don't you answer?
I mean, it's a great question, and it shocks people, I think, from our backgrounds to know that, to learn that there is this brisk critique
from progressive Africans. Odinkalu wrote a beautiful essay about this, Chidi Odinkalu, some years ago, and you read it and say, that, again, that's why I said in Latin America, I'd learned, anybody can learn it, it's not arcane knowledge, that sometimes these terms are code for something else, right? And sociologically, it's code for the non-poor in some of the poorer places I've worked in Latin America. And I was...
So how do you give a real voice to the poor then that isn't
go out
about
and let
let's
them,
just give them...
Be there and actually listen to what they're saying. Because they're, in my experience, they're all only too happy to talk about their problems. And they, the mediation, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get sociological. I mean, the mediation between poor people and the rest of the world is actually probably going to be easier because of new information technologies. And again, when Dr. Inez started twittering, I don't know how to do that, but I was a little incredulous myself. And then there were really specific things like, why can't I get a TB test?
But it's interesting, because there's a lot of investment now going into social entrepreneurs, really working on creating accountability mechanisms using cell phones for the very poorest people. And so I think that is going to create a groundswell of accountability and a lot of questioning. It moves very quickly from concerns about the local services to concerns about government, and I'm intrigued to see where you think that might go. But also, how do we hold the NGOs to account properly? Is that a fair criticism that Andrew's made?
It would be really great in a lot of the places I've worked, including Haiti, if the NGOs could be held accountable for supporting I hate to use these terms like national plan, but I'm going to go ahead and use that shorthand. If you're trying to build a health system or water security, I don't really know much about, although I'm a cheerleader for economic growth through private investment, in the areas that concern us most, which are public education, public health, and water security. It would be great if there was a way to have accountability for NGOs that was actually able to say, you didn't do your work well. This has to be improved.
Do you want to come on that as well?
Just on the accountability, I know I'm being careful what I say in relation to the mandate, but I would be very clear that this framework that the 11 countries have signed up to, they must be held accountable for it. And that accountability has to come also from their own citizens. So I hope that framework will be very well publicized within countries.
It's never done like that.
Well, it's going to be done like that this time.
Who is accountable? The government. What is good? Accountability, I like it. NGOs are accountable to nobody. And when we ask them to be accountable, you receive $4 million to do that, show us the result. They start to say, no democracy. We're not allowed to do this. So that means the money the NGOs receive are coming from the work of somebody in the West, in the rich and the mid-income country. Why are they not accountable? Why the government have to be accountable on delivery and not NGOs? And there is a lot of, that there is as much money going in a non-reported way through NGOs in Rwanda and to public sector. We are accountable of delivery, they are not. And this money is for our people. And our people even doesn't know. They just see this person that look like the Saint Virgin Mary coming with money, and they say, my goodness, save us. But this saver come with responsibilities. They have to be accountable. And this maybe is the next frontier of such a forum.
That's a very good point. Right, you've been waiting a while.
Thanks. My name is Andrea Grant. I'm a PhD student here at Oxford. And actually, Minister, I had a question for you, because you spoke about the role of Rwandan culture in development, for example, regarding gender, the role of the Queen Mothers in the past. And I know that Rwanda has drawn on things like Gacaca, Ngando, Torero, Agaciro for kind of developments. And I was just wondering why you thought that was so important. Why is Rwandan culture drawing on these traditional models or models from the past so important for the future?
Why our culture is important?
What you see as the role of Rwandan culture in its development?
It's 90% of, you know, I was not there at the time of my grandmom. I have been raised in Europe, so I miss a big part of my own culture. But if you see the tradition, what we call the legend, etc., Rwandan people have always wanted to be good. The solidarity that we found in our health insurance, etc., existed already in a sense that when there was a scarcity of food, a chief that let his people dying was removed by the king. You see, so that means it's all this that we have somehow in us that we have revigorate in a very good way. And the position of the woman, the child, you know, in our traditional song, we say the child is a prince. You see, so that means we, etc. And based on this culture, that moved the population for its own development.
Can I just quickly, was there a specific reason you thought they shouldn't be looking at the
No, there wasn't
culture,
a reason I thought they shouldn't. But no, I was just wondering because we have had these examples like Gachacha, Ngando, Itorero. And I was just wondering how you thought that played into the
But
especially
without our culture, we will not have made it.
Yeah.
Because tradition, what we say, rational justice, doesn't look like us. And it will have taken 200 years, you see. So we don't have time. And if we find a solution in our culture, we make it, and also the population cope, because the victim have to cope with what we discuss and we propose.
I'm Dr. Sariwat from the Thai Health Foundation Promotion Thailand. I would like to ask Professor Farmer about how do you reconstruct or cope with the health infrastructure in Rwanda after the genocide to deliver your medical and health services.
Okay, we're going to take 2 or 3 questions and answer them all in a group. The lady over there.
My name is Batia Masika. I work for the OECD. I'm the head of a newly launched network of foundations, but I'm not going to speak in that capacity. My question is for Paul. We've had the chance to work a bit together in Haiti. The question for the session today was, can it be replicated? I think what we've heard is, do we want to replicate it? Because there's been some, and again, I'm not judging, with a push-pull of the international community on the basis of some allegations is something that is a question mark, meaning, is that the price to pay? You have strong leadership, but there is collateral damage. So is that what we need? And is that what we need in Haiti? Paul, I've always wondered what you tell people, what are the 3 lessons? Because we've tried to bring some directions to get the government to tell NGOs that they should report to them. There is weak leadership. What do you do in this context? How do you apply any lesson? Because I'm puzzled by what can be imported from the Rwandan example. And I know how so many people in Haiti have gone to study that example, and still it doesn't seem that there are any lessons to be replicated.
I'm Richard Graham from Comic Relief. I wanted to pick up the idea of replication, because I think if we frame the debate around replicating an entire country model, I think that's a kind of a flawed conversation from the out. One of the things I just wanted to ask the panel is, my understanding is one of the things that Rwanda did, particularly in the business space, was to make it very easy to register land title, and in doing so enable people to get capital for businesses. And the second thing that they did is they made it much easier and cut out all the bureaucracy of being able to register a business. And it's, if that's true, if my understanding is correct, I wonder whether it's those kinds of elements of work that is done at a government level in terms of the policy framework that is actually relatively straightforward to replicate into other territories.
You know, Rwanda is very much aware. I mean, a lot of their growth and development has been because of the government and the effectiveness of government for the last 10 years. But they have a passion. They've been growing at 8% GDP growth. Their goal is to grow at 11.5% for the next 5 to 10 years. You can't do that without a very vibrant private sector. And the only way you create jobs and GDP growth is to create an environment where entrepreneurs and private enterprise can grow and make profits and hire people. And so they've very systematically gone through the bureaucracies of starting a business, of regulating a business, of taxing a business, and they're pounding that to how do we simplify that? How do we create that environment for that entrepreneur to be successful? Because they're very much conscious that jobs and economic growth is the only way any country works its way into a prosperous. And so, you know, they're very thoughtful people. I mean, these are not hard things to do. There's just a will in Rwanda that says if you're going to create a place for entrepreneurs and private enterprise, private business people to do things, what do you have to get out of their way? And you know, they make a list and they check them off. And if they need to change the law, they go to the parliament. Parliament changes the law. I mean, it doesn't mean we don't run into roadblocks all the time, but there is a process that says we're going to knock these down, and there's a common vision about what we want to do.
So, Minister, just what was your thinking as a government in terms of how to promote the private sector?
To open a business in Rwanda, it takes 3 hours if you are you enter in the country in correct way, isn't it?
Yep.
If 3 hours and a half pass, you have a number where you can complain. Yeah, that's true. And the head of the institution is answerable. So that means you are right, and he is right too, because we try, and always we find a problem. And there is international ranking that help us to situate where we are and what we have to change. So it's a process, it's ongoing, it's not perfect, and every year it's better. That's our way to do. We discovered this year that one of the bottleneck is a private sector in health. So we have called all the people in private sector and we say, what is your problem? It's access to loan, etc., etc. And we try to help them to promote the sector. You see? So that means, and next year we will find something else and we will make other progress in that area. And there was a question for
on the
Paul.
front there. Yeah.
How we rebuild. This is for Paul because I guess he talk about.
Yeah,
he talk about 3 hospitals they have built, but in the same time the government has built 10. So don't forget that. Don't forget that.
Don't give Paul too much credit in all this. Paul, so you had 2 sets of questions asked to you.
I'll combine them, right? If that's okay. Watch me do it.
Yeah.
The infrastructure and the lessons learned question. So I will be happy to go into specific details about how to design infrastructure. I won't do that here, don't worry, Matthew. So that it's dignified, it's safe, and we've tried to think of, again, this is a clumsy term, but a platform where you have community-based care, which is delivered in people's homes. That's a kind of human infrastructure, if I could be crass, that connect to clinics and that connect to district hospitals. And although Dr. Agnes said he built 3 and we built 10, I built none. I mean, I can't even lift 50 pounds. But Partners in Health was proud to be the partner of the Rwanda Ministry of Health and others, local groups, to build 3 of the remaining 4 district hospitals that were not, so we went to 3 of the 4 districts where there was no district hospitals and rebuilt or built them. And safety is a big issue. For example, infection control, beauty, dignity, design, you know, having real respect for people and a safe working place for doctors. Now, if you're interested in that, I'll share what we've written and are trying to learn. Back to Batila's question, which is related to me, if one of the 3 lessons that we can learn is why did we build, after the earthquake in Haiti, we built a teaching hospital. It ought to be obvious why we did it since their teaching hospitals were destroyed. But we built it as Partners in Health, again, for the Ministry of Health. All of it. It's owned by the people of Haiti. Now, does that wager work in the short term? Well, let me just give a figure from Rwanda, back to the infrastructure question. In northern Rwanda, I hope some of you have gone to visit Butaro, which is a very beautiful area. We built a $4.3 million hospital, opened the first cancer center in rural Africa. It's owned by the Rwandans, and within 2 years, 52% of all the salaries of that hospital were being paid by the public sector. That, to me, is a public-private partnership that celebrates the need to have everyone pulling together to put something in place. In Haiti, a much larger medical center, the largest solar-powered hospital in the developing world, my Skoll talk right after the earthquake, I was telling the story about our friend who helped solarize our clinics in Rwanda, in Lesotho, Burundi. I asked him to come to Haiti to help us there, where the need is even more stringent, and he died in the earthquake, working with Partners in Health. So that, Bachil, gets me back to the question of perseverance that was brought up by Gru Brundtland and Bill Strickland. That was the theme of our discussion. What's the time frame on health and social justice? How long does it take? Can it be sped up, as in Rwanda, with a fairly remarkable recovery? After only 19 years ago this week was the genocide. Does it take longer when it's interrupted by coups d'etats, disruptions, bad foreign aid, conditional foreign aid, earthquakes? It does take a long time. And we need to stick with this work. The time frame is very long.
We're pretty much close to our official cut-off time. I just wanted to ask one last question to Mary before we go into the informal phase. And that's really, you mentioned earlier you sit on the Ibrahim Prize panel of judges, which is really looking at governance in Africa and trying to encourage good governance by rewarding former African leaders who did a good job in office. And it's several years you've not been able to award the prize because you haven't found there was a suitable candidate. But I'm wondering, what are the lessons that are already become clear in terms of what you want to encourage in terms of models of leadership and government in Africa?
I would say of more significance for that foundation is the Mo Ibrahim Index, which looks in detail over a whole range of indicators, how governments are performing. And the trouble is that the available data is just not perfect, to say the least. So I'd say the Mo Ibrahim Index is the best resource now for African countries. It's better than any of the other, World Bank or UNDP or whatever. But still, interestingly, and I think it's perhaps indicative of like a country that contests from time to time how it is ranked is Rwanda.
Right.
Even though when members of the foundation have gone to Rwanda and sat and talked about the figures, that seems to that problem seems to disappear. But I think there is a
disappear.
Well,
no,
maybe not.
Because the Mo Ibrahim Index say that Rwanda is the less secure country, even from East African, and the people who are laughing that is not us, it's Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, because it's for laughing. Kigali, Rwanda entirely is more secure than their country, so when they read that, it's a nonsense, and it remove credit for the rest.
Well, I'd like just to formally, before we continue with the conversation, just thank the panel for being so candid and thoughtful and direct this morning. For those who want to carry on, we have a question straight in front of me there. The gentleman, the mic will come to you.
I'm Jim Greenbaum, and I've got a nuts and bolts question, probably directed more toward Paul from the funding side. With all the competing and ever-evolving models out there for healthcare, especially the frontline healthcare workers, and as you know, I'm supporting one of your projects, Last Mile Health. As a funder, do we evaluate which projects we should be funding to replicate versus piloting new test projects? Do we evaluate it on a cost per person for the primary health care outcomes?
Yeah, these are very, I'm not going to say complex, but I think we should acknowledge, first of all, that the data are not very good and that the metrics are not worked out. So anything I say is just an assertion based on the 30 years I've been trying to figure out how to assess our own performance and that of others. I think part of it, again, is there a way to show that some let's call it capacity building locally, that has to be a critical issue, right? Because if we believe, as this panel and most people do believe, that we really want to respect the rights, particularly of people who are living in poverty, to leave poverty behind and end it, to leave the ill health associated with poverty behind, that is not the job for someone like me. It's the job for, again, the Liberians, the Rwandans, et cetera. So building local capacity, we have metrics. Look at how many people are being employed by the outfit, the local people, and you can even go beyond subnational. How many people from this region are being employed? How many women are being employed? These are really simple. They're not simple, but they're easier than figuring out what the latest metric is. Another, and I'll keep this very short, I promise. Another is, how are they supporting the public sector? Not because we're looking for a big public sector, but because we believe that public sectors are important for scale, national scale, and for people to have basic rights. Sometimes the public sector role is largely regulatory in healthcare, right? Like the FDA is to protect Americans. Another one is if you want a quick report card on how a system is doing, look at maternal mortality. Maternal mortality is much better way of looking at system performance than some of the things that I described in assessing Rwanda. I mean, meaning uptake of vaccination, et cetera. It's just that it's a complex process that links access to family planning to access to prenatal care to care for women in obstructed labor. And that's a subset, but it requires blood, banking, and some capacity to refer for a cesarean section. That's just a little, there are lots of little tricks like that. And the other thing is just make sure, as Last Mile is trying to do, that it really serves the poor and the rural poor and build systems. So to judge every group on their ability to do a C-section is not at all what I'm suggesting. It's just a report card on the overall system. But when you're going to an area where there isn't a health system and someone's building it, that deserves even more support because they're unable to do some of the complex things that we described in Rwanda, cancer care, et cetera, but they're laying the groundwork. And you know, again, the long-term approach to the last mile is even more important than building a hospital.
In one word, chose project that support national plan to eliminate poverty by capacity building and deliver the rights, health, education, blah, 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 all those.
I'm from Ethiopia and from NGO sector, so I have to say something about what the minister has said regarding NGOs. I think this is the same ideology that the Rwandan government and the Ethiopian government follow towards NGOs. I think it's about trust. The whole thing goes to trust. Those governments do not trust NGOs, thinking that they are serving the donors back in the West rather than.
So what does that lead you? What's the question that leads you to?
So the question is actually, I think all NGOs, you know, it's a kind of umbrella statement, which I don't like really. There are really NGOs who are serving their people, their country, and the government. And there are NGOs who are doing something else. So why not you take a measure for those who are doing something against the interest of the country, rather than really talking about them? Why don't you close them if they are not really serving the people, rather than really, you know, mentioning these statements in such kind of forums? This is my question, really.
So I can say that we did. 1998.
So you did what?
1998, we had tons of NGOs, you know, like in IT. It's a nightmare. So what we did, we look what they were doing, and those that were not doing things that are entering in our plan development or doing things that were a nonsense, we asked them to go and act elsewhere. So in Rwanda, there is many NGOs. And I have a lot of respect because without them, my work will be not achievable. And what we ask is we ask them to organize in fora of civil society, and we discuss with them. They are our best ally. So my statement is not against NGOs. It's against a prototype of NGOs that are vampires.
I mean, the trouble, I mean, the difficulty, one of the difficulties obviously is that we don't really want governments deciding which NGOs are good and bad. If you see where that gets you, you look at Russia and China, and it isn't necessarily an answer to that problem, but I agree there needs to, I mean, it does seem to me that there are lots of questions that have been raised here that we need to think more about in terms of the accountability system for NGOs. I mean, Paul, I mean, a nightmare in Haiti because so many
well,
NGOs?
I think it makes it very difficult, and because, again, it's very simple. I mean, I'm not speaking as a government official, I'm not one. But if there's a lot of goodwill and you're adding up to less than sum of your parts, then the next question is why and how can we improve it? And, you know, I think there, you know, just like the report card for, you know, how to look at a public health intervention or a health intervention, we can do that. I think, you know, I feel some sadness, of course, in discussing it because I know how much goodwill there is. And we just want to be more effective and also know that there are situations, times, places. There are very bad governments out there too, right? I mean, you know, I don't know what it would have been like to work in Rwanda in 1993. I mean, I have friends who did. I was working in Haiti, and I've lived through several military coups. You know, been on the receiving end of some problems. You know, in Haiti, and the end of a civil war in Peru, after a genocide in Guatemala. It's very difficult work, and it's full of pathos because there's goodwill that is being damaged. And this is what I was trying to say earlier, rather ineloquently. There's goodwill that is damaged by what has happened before. You can't erase history, you know, and there's a lot of sadness in that, but NGOs have a really wonderful, positive role to play, just like people want to see economies grow. And doing it better, that's what, you know, I think that's why I was named a Skoll Fellow. And it's just, what innovation is there if you're a doctor and actually delivering medical care? You know, so that's not very innovative. Sally may be gone now, but for some reason they said, okay, you're an innovator. It's trying to maybe find that path to use goodwill from non-government sector in a way that builds local capacity, builds respect. And again, I'm not suggesting that we're pros at it. We make all kinds of errors, but I think that would be innovative.
George from Engineers Without Borders Canada, and Minister, you are brilliant. I said you'd be brilliant last night, and you are. I'm going to ask a typical engineering-y question, which I'll get into sort of the operational geekiness, which is perhaps a little bit
just a little bit of
unsexy, unsexy. But I'm interested sort of in three things. When you guys were framing out what was working in the health sector, you talked about a combination of planning and flexibility, which to me is there's sort of an operationalization of a learning agenda and approach. I'm interested in what that looks like. Second is, how did you avoid the pilotitis that persists within the NGO sector of perhaps finding one great district and then trying to scale that and that actually not working very well? So how did that get avoided? And then third, I'm interested in salary support to district health officials to actually give them proper salaries so that they can deliver their work, and how did that happen, and what was the conversation with donors in order to be able to make that a reality, because donors don't like salaries, they love funding stuff that they can see and touch.
Great, if you pass the mic to your right. And
So my name is Josh, I work with Healthcare Without Harm. I've been really interested to hear this discussion.
It was really necessary to call your organization now, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
There is a lot of healthcare with harm.
Sustainability in the healthcare sector.
Right.
Basing our work on the origins of the Hippocratic Oath. But anyway, that's not my questions about it all. I've been very interested to hear this conversation about civil rights, human rights, the roles of NGOs in different countries in the world. And I think it's central to what a lot of us do in a lot of parts of the world. It's a core conversation. One piece that seems to be missing from what we've talked about so far is the role of business and the role of corporations. And so we've seen, it seems like this conversation somewhat singled out NGOs, yet business is very active all over the world as well, and it's another sector. And I'm wondering if the panelists might comment on that component in the context of everything we were just talking about.
That's a very good question. I mean, I just sort of struck in terms of Myanmar at the moment, and it's very much on my radar to see the businesses that are all gearing up to go in, including a number of most prominent global brands that, interestingly, are using their foundations to go in first and kind of prepare the ground. But I think there's a lot of very important questions that I'm going to ask Dale also to address in terms of, you know, now business talks the Michael Porter language of shared value, you know, particularly the Western businesses. How do we hold them properly to account when they go into these difficult situations? But Dale, what should we expect of the business community? And then I'm going to ask the Minister and Paul to respond to the other question, and then we'll have a wrap up.
You know, the business people that I work with generally tend to be independent, entrepreneurial business people who, if they were looking at a pure risk reward of an investment, they wouldn't be in East Africa. They're here because there's a philanthropic motivation, because they're at a stage in their life where they want to do something to give back, and they are attracted.
So you're not really dealing with the commodity industries and all that miners.
No, I mean, we do have those issues, but you know, there are different types of business people with different kinds of motivations, and we encourage them all to get here. But the reality is that you can't get a risk return as a pure business in East Africa that most people are going to choose to do, and so it's a tipping point. As those economies get larger, then you'll get people who come in who are motivated because they primarily want to make money, and we would love to get to that point.
And me, I believe that if we don't succeed in creating a solid business sector in Rwanda, we will not achieve our development. You know why? As Minister of Health, I need successful business so they pay tax and I can build hospitals. You understand? It's part of our development, and we try to promote and attract. For the three questions, I remember one, how we avoid pilot. We don't avoid pilot. We love pilot, but in Rwanda, not in health. If something is good, ouch. I don't know why we should pilot it in a portion. What those people in this district have the special and not the rest of the country. No pilot. It is good, it's for all. Except the pilot in the plane. So the other question was...
So you don't really test things out at all?
But why should I test the willingness of people for good life? Why should I lose my time for that? You know, the first pilot I faced was, let's see if those women in Rwanda are ready to take a pills for their children to be healthy when they're HIV positive. Which mother at us will refuse that?
Well, I mean, there obviously are difficulties that we've had in some countries in getting people to take the pills, and
they don't take the pills because they don't trust the people who give the pills.
But I mean, there are different ways that we try and overcome the trust problem, and I guess you must have an experimental approach to some extent.
No. I want to just, I know, of course, I'm not trying to rehabilitate pilots, Dr. Agnes.
No pilots.
Except, of course, those flying Rwanda Air. But to get back to our engineering question and Matthew's point, and you know, and also to use Mary's term, realizing rights. So I would say that you've not been hostile to, I mean, I know you haven't, to the idea that you know, yes, we have the aspiration of having something brought to scale immediately, but that's not how things happen in healthcare. I don't know about education. I doubt it does there. So one of the questions for the idea of, you know, learning how to deliver healthcare better, as we've worked on together, is how do you actually have a there? How do you actually have, you have to start somewhere. You go back to the question of people. I also think it's absurd to ask, gee, would you, to a mother, let's do a pilot study to see if they want their kids not to be born with HIV. I think it's silly. And that, there's a lot of work like that receives a lot of funding under the name of pilot project or operational research, or, I wouldn't really want to be involved in that. But taking something to scale, maybe we should get rid of the pilot word. Like if you start, she hates that word, in case you haven't included.
What we do, we start something and we replicate the same thing in each province, and after that in each district, and after that in each sector.
But only if it works.
But it works because we all go. No, before starting something, we need evidence.
Yes, that's it.
You understand?
Yes.
But why should I replicate evidence that has been shown in Uganda?
Yes. Or to close this out, because there's a language issue around pilot. But if we take a proven medical intervention, right, that has been proven in a clinical trial, piloted, if you will, for different reasons to compare effectiveness of two regimens, then it's not really an experiment or a pilot to roll it out unless you call that an equity experiment. Like, can the world be equitable and compassionate? And say that, of course, a mother in country X wants the same thing for her child as country Y, and here's the technology. And so we've tried to use the equity language when we're talking about equity. And it rankles, as you might imagine, our hosts, and it's not just Africa, across the world, if they're in any way thought to be the subjects of an experiment or a pilot, when in fact what we're really piloting is justice and equity. And it's a very difficult conversation.
This has been,
Another question?
Well, no, I think we've actually got to wrap up now, but this has been a very, I think, very rich and broad and wide-ranging conversation. I certainly have enough questions to keep going for several more hours, but Mary just flew in from California, needs a snooze, I think, besides anything else, and we've all got to go on to the next session. But I want to finish, this is supposed to be a session looking ultimately at the question of replicability. And so I want to leave on a positive note. And I wonder if each of our panelists, if they had to just say, here's one lesson to take away if you go to another country from the experience of Rwanda that you would feel could be a useful idea to put into practice where you are. And I'll start with Paul, and we'll walk down come down to the minister last.
One lesson, if I had to choose one, is high quality medical care can be rolled out to some of the more rural and poor regions of the world, and it's one of the ranking human rights problems of our time, the right to health care. And I think there's a lot that can be replicated from Rwanda, from the community-based model, to the link to care for really difficult illnesses like leukemia for kids.
Mary?
I think it's the possibilities for the South-South learning in health that I've certainly seen in practice. I think there's a great deal that can be learned from the experience of health officials going and seeing what's happening in Rwanda, or taking part in conferences or seminars. I've seen that in practice. Just to finish, because there was a question about corporate responsibility, we didn't really deal with it. I think we've been very much focusing on Rwanda as Rwanda, but as we know, that's not part. The real regional problem is Eastern DRC, and that's part of the framework, and we haven't dealt with that, and I think it's probably appropriate that we didn't, but just to signal it.
And the question of mining in particular.
Absolutely, and exploitation. And that is the subject of a framework, part of the framework agreement, and that will have to be implemented.
Dale?
Our experience is that leadership with the heart of a servant changes everything. And effective, powerful, determined leadership that is there to serve is a very effective weapon, and it draws and attracts people to come and want to help and inspires attention.
And lastly, the last word to the minister.
I think what is absolutely replicable is to let countries express their desire to development as they are, without external dictatorship, and be at service of your people, and accountable against achievement. But to reach that point, every country has to set up its own framework. It takes time, it takes good leadership, and come and see what we do. I asked him to come for many reasons. You are an NGO, and I would like you to work in one.
Great, well, thank you very much.